Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to lead this FOM session in this very interesting conference. And I welcome all of you to participate in this session. So I would like to share my screen and show you the today's agenda. We will have a slide change here. Xiaojuan Ma, she will start with her presentation of management mediation in China, and then we continue with Angi Rösch and Harald Schmidbauer. They are making a presentation about the equity markets of the BRICS and the world, and they are focusing on raw materials suppliers versus manufacturing economies. Then I will make my presentation on the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities in the new international climate regime to be based on cumulated per capita emission rights. And last but not least, Sascha Frohwerk, he will make his presentation on the concentration and co-location of retail stores in Germany. So this is a quick overview of the presentation which are coming. So Xiaojuan Ma, so please, if you can share your screen and make your presentation, it's your floor.
Okay, thank you. And Andreas for the introduction. So my topic is about management and mediation in China, case experiences and a theory and avenues for future research. So as the background, I just want to say, besides my professor job in FOM, and I am also since many years management coach and mediator in the practice, and therefore very interesting. I found it's currently more needs arise about the management and mediation. So that's also my motivation to talk about this topic. I'm going to talk about this topic with 5 parts. Firstly, I would like to talk about current situation and relevance of the topic. And then what are the challenges of management and mediation in China? And what are necessary conditions for successful management and mediation in China? And after that, I'm going to do the comparison between these 2 case studies. And lastly, about avenues for the future research. So, yes, I summarized 6 important points for the current situation and the relevance of the topic. We all know there is actually a strong discussion in Germany, especially in the economic world and also so political world, and about in Germany, should we separate economically from China? So there are many articles in a newspaper or in an online platform, and yes, about these kind of topics. And we also saw in a actual situation that the change of position from China, so China based on its own rapid development, require the equal eye level with the Western world. And from original bottom to top, and that leads to the power struggle. And also another topic is about Western comparing with Eastern ideology. We know in the intercultural management, perception is a very important topic. Perception about what is right to decide how we deal with another culture and how we consider, accept another culture. And also next factor, what I see is even China developed itself very quickly since last 13 years. But in China, there is big deficit with the training system. China is learning now a lot from Germany. We know that China introduced also dual study, dual system. This is all actually introduced from Germany. So, and also the German company very often are considered in China as a kind of best training organizations for the management teams. Because German companies pay a lot of attention for the training, for the further development of the employee. And that we can see in China, there is a big deficit in this area. And next factor is about also lack of acceptance based on the different perception who is right. And people has less acceptance to different cultures. And we know in the integration culture project, and this is common situation. And next one is about low mutual trust. So there are a lot of studies about this lower mutual trust between different cultures. We know from the psychological studies that with the similarity theory, for example, more similarity, and we have more trust, and we have easier trust. We can build up easily trust and accept another part easily. So that's, of course, a big challenge for the cooperation between different cultures. And therefore, and in the practice, exactly based on this big context. And I also realized that from the practice, there are more and more expectations from the practice and about the topic. In the research area, to be honest, I don't see too much studies which is relevant for the management mediation in China between different cultural backgrounds. So there can be done a lot of things. So and then the next question is about reasons. What are the reasons for management conflict in China? After we know the relevance of the topic. So we just said there is low mutual trust between managers with different intercultural background, and also gender, age, it plays also an important role. So and also different understanding and acceptance to compliance behavior. So Professor Marco Waits showed clearly that compliance behavior can be differently understood in different cultures. For example, what is compliance behavior in Germany and what will be understood in China, and these are the differences. And another one is about lack of communication about process and rules implementation about compliance behavior. So compliance is also big content within the management mediation. So next one is based on the high and low context, high context and low context language, which we know original from Professor Hall. And there is inconsistent communication between different cultures. And the next one is about different leadership styles. And there are a lot of studies, for example, although Bush is a AO from 2003, and between different cultures, also the study global, for example, showed clearly there are different leadership muster and styles within different culture cluster. And also in the management conflict situation, we see there are unclear management responsibilities and also system from headquarters, because the headquarters understand the management responsibility. They usually, for example, set up the management by law for the subsidiary in China, but normally their management team understand this responsibility and the system differently than what the headquarters actually originally set for. So therefore, these are 6 reasons for the management conflict situation in China. Yes, and therefore I developed 3 research questions. First one is about what challenges might we face in management mediation specifically in China. And the second one is, can Western tools be adapted for conflict management in China? If yes, and what kind of local adaptation should we make? Yeah, because we know normally it's not rare that we introduce the Western system directly into the Eastern culture, and we know that the local adoption, as of my research, for example, in the year 2007, shows clearly that the local adoption for the HR system and the HR instrument is very necessary. So here, concrete for the topic conflict management. Yeah. And next one is about what are the differences between a purely Chinese team and cross-culture team, because that's very interesting. It's very different behaviors showed within these different teams. Yeah. So these are the 3 research questions. I just want to introduce you shortly about the research method. So I checked from the literature. And then I decided to do the 2 case studies and the sampling, and I choose the 2 middle-sized companies in China, and both have their headquarters in Germany. So, but the conflict, because of the research questions 3, and I choose, for example, the conflict, one is between 2 Chinese managers, and another one is between Chinese and German managers. So 2 different teams. And the next one is about, 1 second, I just want to, 1 second. So, and then, yes, and I set the Dula-Baum model, so transformative mediation into the process. Normally, I use this model for my management mediation process in the practice. And it's confirmed many times it's a very good tool also for China. And I also use the Chinese compared and use the Chinese definition about 中间人 Yeah, 中间人 means in Chinese or translated into English, it's also about mediator. And also the principle, for example, 求大同存小异, Chinese principle is we can, we search for the big common sense and keep the small differences. That's a Chinese principle. And the language, I use the Chinese language with because of my old Chinese background, and I use the Chinese with the pure Chinese team, and I use the English with the intercultural team. One is German manager and another is Chinese manager. Sorry. Yes, and about process. So I said I went through with the 3 to 6 interviews with each case, yeah, and set so we did the 6 to 10 workshops for each of the team. It's a very big process, yeah. And then, sure, we had the facet, give them the reflection and a summary. Yes, and I come back to the research question: what are the challenges of management and mediation in China? And then I found out in this research process that generally, and there is small readiness because of harmony orientation and face protection. There is a small readiness toward management mediation. So we know that management mediation actually in Western world is a normal HR instrument which can help managers to deal with their conflict, and they are happy to get this kind of support. But in China, because of the face protection and because of the harmony orientation, that they do not want to have this kind of mediation process, because they think that if they open up the conflict, that their harmony cannot be kept again, and they lost the face toward each other. Yeah. And that's very clearly showed in the interviews. And next one is about low self-responsibility in the process. So yes, and the first one also, this fund were also confirmed already in the earlier research from Tim Tum AO and Chen Chun. Yeah. So the second challenge is about a low self-responsibility in the process. And this also confirmed from the Chen Starosta also in my own study in 2015. And the point is about a hierarchy process. That the conflict party, they decide to do it, yeah, with the request from the headquarters, but they show very low self-responsibility because they do not think this process is for us. This is what I can get support, or what I can get some profit. Yeah. And next one is about real constructive and clear communication. And this is because of high context language. And these are also confirmed already from earlier studies from Kirkenbridge AO and Triadis AO. And also famous Chinese author Lin, already in the 1938, showed clearly that Chinese people cannot have the constructive and clear communication with each other. The next challenge is about different understanding about, in the management and mediation, and we need to communicate about negative behavior. What I do not want to accept, for example, certain negative behaviors. And they, in the Chinese cultural context, and people do not accept this directly on communication of negative behavior. They do want to hide this negative information because they do not want to, destroy the face. And next point is about the lack of the ability to argue during the discussion, and that's also clear from the previous study, Chuan and Goody Kunst and Tin Dumi, and this during the mediation process, we need to have the discussion with each other, and you need to have the ability to argue. Yeah, what do I see from my perspective? And this is showed in a case study clearly that they have lack of this ability. So, and also next factor or challenge is about the Chinese language and non-linear thinking patterns. And Kaplan in his research in 1966 shows very clearly this figurative Chinese language. Yeah. So this leads to the non-linear thinking patterns, and which is totally differently than the West thinking pattern. So next, to answer the next research question, what are the necessary conditions for successful management and mediation in China? And I would like to show these three conditions. The first one is about the reputation and the social status of mediator. So this is effective support to increase acceptance. As an expert with high status and prominent, the mediator should be able to offer expert advice to the parties. And this is differently than the requirement from, for example, Germany. And here, if you have the education as a mediator, management mediator, then you have filled the condition. But in China, you need to have the high reputation and the social status. And also the professionalism and the rich experience as a mediator and a coach provide the necessary foundation for transformational mediation. So Rogers outlined in the year 1942 the three basic attitudes for mediators and coaches. So congruence, yeah, unconditional positive attention, and empathic understanding and empathy. So due to the less constructive communication skills of the Chinese, mediators need very good questions and listening skills to identify the broader and deeper dimensions of the parties' interaction. So by using these communication skills, they help facilitate communication between the disputants to explore the events, experiences and meanings and emotions that have caused and sustained the conflict. So as experienced mediator and a coach can establish a good structure and follow a common thread. For example, because of the high context language and the face saving in Chinese communication, the mediator should know the Chinese culture well. Yeah, and next one is about special preparation phase. In China, in this through these studies, and I found out that a long preparation phase is necessary due to the hidden conflicts and a pronounced facing saving factor. And in addition, and there is currently a general lack of human trust in China. So And next one is about the preparation. Further is so I said before 3 to 6 interviews and coaching talks, 1-to-1 with conflict parties. In the interview, it's important to have patience and take time for the people. The mediator and coach allows the conflict parties to let out their discontent and emotional hurt through the conversations. After people let out their emotion, they are better able to work constructively with each other to find a solution. And therefore, we need to talk about anger management. In order to avoid anger and resulting strong rejection within the process, the mediator should hold at least 3 one-on-one meetings with the respective conflicting parties before the joint sessions with the conflicting parties. In China, when anger emerges face-to-face, it's very difficult to repair the damaged, lost as a result. So the third condition about time and patience. So we didn't do the typical 2-day workshops, but a Chinese version, which I said before, 3 to 6 interviews as preparation, and then 6 to 10 workshops. So not day workshops. What we did is as 4 hours workshop. So conflict are related to different values. So based on the factors of interculture, generation, gender, etc. So and also a lot of time is needed to translate and define the concrete conflict content. And we know what mediator does is about translation. Yeah, translation, not language translation, but the meaning translation. So because there is high context language in China, therefore the translation of the meaning is a very time intensive process. Sorry. So what we also found out is so differences between the intraculturally and intercultural teams, conflict teams. There are also certain commonalities which I would like to share with you here too. So within the intercultural team, that means 2 Chinese managers. So conflict parties have shown a cooperative attitude to mediation. So hierarchy plays a very important role. That means so we really use the hierarchy as a support instrument for the management and mediation, which is not common in a Western version. And an acceptable solution for the specific conflict is reached, as I said, Chinese principle. Yeah. And we need to have a big common sense, but we can keep the small differences. Yeah. So, and the both conflict parties develop a cooperative attitude toward each other, and the relations exactly are strengthened through this process, and dispute conflict management skills are strengthened. And the values are adjusted, and the gender hierarchy and the generations as moderators influence the process negatively. So, and let's say together about the intercultural differences. So in this intercultural team, conflict team, 1 German manager and 1 Chinese manager. And what I see is conflict parties have shown a strong resistance to mediation. And both assign the problem to basically values problem. They do not want to comment together, and because they say there are big basically value problem, we cannot work together. So both have held a power struggle position, and it's about honor, win or lose. Normally, actually, in a private mediation process, yes, we see this kind of problem, but in a management mediation, actually, this situation is real. But in the intercultural team, yes, again, win or lose about honor. And about management qualification and ethics were no longer represented in the process at all. And also we showed before the influence factor, for example, perception. And exactly we can see in a case study, and each of the parts say, this is right, you have to adapt what I see. Yeah. So, and also another very interesting fund is about the local manager is more powerful due to local experience and forms subgroup to support himself and isolate the foreign manager. Even the foreign manager from the hierarchy is one level higher. Very interesting. And the gender national culture as moderator influence the process very strongly, but hierarchy not. Yeah, this is also very interesting to see big difference between intraculture and interculture. And there are some common knowledges. So first one is support from headquarters is essential. At time-intensive process, one-on-one conversation as preparation. A lot of listening and allowing of emotions. And next one is about clarity of goal from the organization, influences the process, and the sport has a positive effect on the mediation process. So because this part spot, as I'm going to talk in hypothesis again, it's very interesting point. Hypothesis. So through these two case studies and comparison, and I developed 5 hypotheses for the future research. First one is about hierarchy plays an important role in Chinese intercultural conflict situations and their mediation process. But the role of an intercultural conflict situation and a mediation process is less important. So the hierarchy doesn't play an important role. So the second hypothesis is about conflict and arise much more easily in cross-culture, cross-gender collaboration. As we know that different gender has different value, that's sure, and but also cross-gender collaboration, if the team is one man and one woman, and the process is much less, much more difficult to solve. Yeah, and culture plays a third hypothesis. Culture plays a significant role as moderator in conflict situations. So we see there is gender culture and there is different countries' culture. And the next hypothesis is the local side in cross-cultural conflict settings tends to build a support group to leverage power and to escalate the conflict to other people in the team. So it's, for example, it doesn't happen in a intercultural team. So pure Chinese team, it was not happened. So hierarchy decide. But in the intercultural process, it happened. So very interesting last hypothesis is about the effect of sport. Yeah, so we know that sport plays an important role for the well-being of the people, but it's also showed a very strong positive influence with the mediation process, because people have high self-confidence, and that we talk about anger management is an important process in this mediation process. And people, as there are 2 managers, and they did support regularly, and they have showed very clearly higher self-confidence and higher acceptance for the ongoing process. So yes, and there are these are the 5 hypotheses what I would like to give for the future research, and I think this is necessary to have the for example the quantitative research study to to check about this hypothesis in the topic of management and mediation in China, and these are the literatures which I would like to show you. Okay, that's all.
Yeah, thank you very much, Xiaojuan. That was a very good presentation. I found it very interesting to see your Chinese perspective of that issue, because we are looking from the Western perspective, and it's very interesting to get this insight from a pure Chinese perspective. So yeah, I would like to ask the other participants to raise questions. I have some questions here, but I want to give the floor to the other participants first. So any questions? Yeah, please, Klaus.
Yeah, many very naive, perhaps, having close contacts with Chinese people, mostly, however, academics, over the last 30 years. I never really fully saw that it's so complicated and it's so culturally burdened. Why is it so? I mean, maybe I'm just too naive and haven't understood it. So it was just, yeah, it was just normal in a certain way. Maybe I'm too direct on this.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmermann. That's a very good question. So, toward, actually, we just described just that one is management and mediation. As we show at the beginning as the context, political struggle, power struggle, and that's continued to management. Management behaviors. So, but for the academic, I think academic, there is much less power struggle. So people do not think, well,
there's always power struggle everywhere in the world, but maybe not specific. That's what you're saying, yes. Okay.
Exactly. So the power struggle plays a very important role. And also the perception. I believe in the academic world, the academics have a much stronger perception to, to choose, not to what I see is correct, but we have much more openness toward the world. So I think that plays an important role.
Okay, get your point. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, other questions? Maybe I have 2 questions. So you talked about transformative mediation. Maybe could you say a few words about what is transformative mediation?
Sure. Yeah. So there are some differences between, there are some other mediation. So I need to check out 1 second. I have here important. So there are a couple, let's say, definitions for the different mediations. So the transformative is one of these transform. 1 second, I come to here. Is just one style of one part of the mediation. So I just want to see tell you about the differences between the so for example, for the transformative mediation is how can see that the conflict, so there are some some criteria, for example, the conflict party are ready to work with the expert together before they get the final decision. So, and the next one is about the relationship conflict. So here is about relationship conflict. These are also inclusive personal and business. And also there are a lot of emotional and behavior questions raised in a conflict situation. So yes, so there are even more criteria for the transformation mediation. So
okay, yeah, thank you very much. And then another question. You talked about that the position in hierarchy is also very important for the mediator. He should be, if I understood correctly, he should be in a higher hierarchy position to actually do this mediation task. What about age? Can there be conflicts between age and hierarchy? So maybe if the mediator is higher in hierarchy, but he's much younger than the people who are involved in this conflict. Can there be certain conflicts there?
Yes, very good questions. Normally, seniority in China means one perspective is about age, yeah, and another perspective is about hierarchy. So actually, these both are included within the Chinese seniority principle. So this, I don't mean a hierarchy seniority. I don't mean that, because mostly mediators do not have the hierarchy position within the company. Most mediators are external mediators, you know. But I mean the reputation and the reputation and the social status. So for example, very simple. For example, if I have a doctor title, and it helps a lot, you know, and that's exactly the social title in China. As a Chinese people, take care a lot about the titles, about the seniority. Seniority has a different perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was very interesting, and we got much out of your presentation. Are there other questions from the audience? No? Okay. So, Xiaojuan, thank you so much for being with us for this presentation. I hope you will feel better tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you too. Thank you for listening and the questions, and happy to see you again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then I'm coming back to our agenda. So Angi Rösch and Harald Schmidbauer, they will now do their presentation on equity markets of the BRICS and the world, and they're talking about raw material suppliers versus manufacturing economies. So Angi and Harald, it's your floor.
Okay, thank you, and hello everybody.
Hello.
So I share my screen. So my name is Harald Schmidbauer. The lady next to me is Angi Rösch. So this is a joint work actually by both of us and He Yong-da in Taiyuan and Erhan Ulucivis in Istanbul, Turkey. And thank you for the invitation to this conference. We are both statisticians and not labor economists, so we may well be a mismatch to this conference, but nevertheless we were encouraged to participate and present this project. So let's see. but at least we have a few remarks about population in this contribution. Okay, so this is about the stock market of the BRICS. Now the BRICS, we'll see what this is, and we'll see what we mean by raw material suppliers and manufacturing economies. Now here is an introduction, a brief introduction to the BRICS. BRICS is an acronym. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So a group of 5 states. It was proposed back in 2001 by Jim O'Neill, then an investment banker, economist and investment banker. And you know, this is quite extraordinary that an investment banker would propose a group of nations joining together. And indeed, this was kind of corroborated, this was kind of put together, and they founded the BRICS New Development Bank in July 2014. Yeah, so these 5 countries do not form a homogeneous bloc, but they rather have a symbiotic relationship. Namely, Brazil, Russia, and South America are mainly raw material suppliers. For example, energy. Yeah, this is what we focus on. So 3 countries, Brazil, Russia, South Africa, raw material suppliers, while India and China are predominantly manufacturing economies. And this duality, first, makes them a symbiotic relationship, and second, will lead to hypothetically different behavior. From today's point of view, this is really quite crazy. We know what's going on in Russia. We know Russia has invaded its neighbor, Ukraine. This happened earlier in 2014, in March 2014, when Russia annexed the Crimea Peninsula. Now, right after this, the BRICS New Development Bank was founded in July 2014. Now, so from today's point of view, this is really mind-blowing. Anyway, the BRICS hold high-level meetings. The 14th BRICS summit was in June 2022, again with Putin presenting himself on the world stage. German press, I don't know why, but BRICS is largely ignored in the German press. The BRICS states, however, has about 2.3 billion people, which represents 43% of world population. Looking at these figures, you better not ignore the BRICS. By the way, for comparison, the European Union has about 5.8%, less than 6% of world population. And the BRICS, however, unlike the European Union, of course, has a focus on economic cooperation. It's not a political union, it's not a political alliance. And indeed, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa have given limited support of international sanctions during the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so when you look at United Nations resolutions, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa have mostly abstained from condemning Russia for its aggression against Ukraine. Now, here is what we could have done as contribution to this conference. This is a reference to the population development in the BRICS group. And it shows the age dependency ratio. What is the age dependency ratio? It is old people, number of old people plus number of young people over working population. So the working population age 15 to age 65 or so, that's the base number, and number of dependent people, that's why it's called age dependency ratio. So number of people below age 15 plus number of old age people divided by number of working people. So now we see, surprisingly, this has been converging very much for the last few decades among the BRICS countries. So in this respect, right now, the BRICS form a surprisingly homogeneous group. So about 50% or so, 40 to 60% age dependency ratio, which of course means that the number of working people, creating the gross domestic product are outnumbering those who depend on those working. But when we look at the projections, United Nations projections, this is a devastating outlook for China. And the age dependency ratio will be increasing to more than 100% for China during the next 50 years, 60 years. So that means that the working class age groups will have to support more young people plus old people than they are themselves. So one retired person will have to be supported by one working person. So now if you were a manager of, say, big company like Volkswagen, what is the prospect for China? It's a very bad one when you look at this picture. I'd rather invest in, if I were a manager of Volkswagen or some similar big company, I'd rather invest in Africa than in China. So the future is clearly not China when you look at this picture. For comparison, again, here's European Union added and the world added. And you see, for Europe, it doesn't look good. 80% by the end of this century, that's a projection, but China much, much worse. And the world average is better off, and so something between 60 and 70%. But for China, it looks really sinister. Now, that's not actually part of our research. As I said, we could have done research in this direction, given we had enough time. Okay, so now what we are actually presenting is our research project about the stock market of the BRICS. It has nothing to do with population whatsoever. Okay, anyway, our research question is this: considering a network with nodes, a network with nodes. Nodes are the 5 countries and the rest of the world. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the rest of the world. Our question is, how important is each node as a risk spreader? Risk spreader, something bad happens in China, say. How does this spread, this bad news, how does it spread over the other nodes in the network? That's the question. And we have a network of stock markets. This is enriched, let's say, this question by this question: does this importance vary with energy prices? And that's, of course, in line with the structure of the BRICS. When you think of BRICS, there is the raw material suppliers, energy suppliers versus manufacturing economies. So we would hypothesize that raw material prices have an impact on the behavior of these stock markets. Now, here's the data section, daily returns on stock indices. This is what we use as input to our model. And there's Brazil, Russia, Brazil, Bovespa, Sao Paulo, Russia, that's RTS, Russian trading system, Moscow, India, that's Bombay, of course, Mumbai, meanwhile, but the stock index is called Psessen. China, that's Shanghai Stock Exchange Composite Index. In South Africa, that's the Johannesburg All Shares Index. And for the world, we use a Morgan Stanley Index, MSCI World. And to capture what's going on in the energy market, we use the Bloomberg Energy Price Index, BCOM. And the time period from 2010 through 2022, February 25th, almost 3,000 days. And we stop there. We stop there because that's the day when Russia invaded neighboring Ukraine. And somehow that's another hypothesis or another assumption that this may have really impacted the BRICS world very much. And so I don't think this is going to be ever the same after this invasion. Okay, anyway, here are a few remarks about the methodology which we use. So if you are not familiar with time series analysis, this will be off your focus in your research. But let me just make a few remarks. We have a vector autoregressive model in daily returns on stock indices. And we have a rolling window. So rolling window updated daily. Rolling window means we use a rolling set of data as input to estimate the VAR model. Then what we do, we need to capture market volatility. Market volatility is captured as forecast error variance. That's, I think, easy to understand. So how much uncertainty is there in a market? You can forecast tomorrow's returns, but that's not for the sake of forecasting tomorrow's returns. What matters is how wide is the prediction interval. And if the prediction interval is large, then it means there's a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty in that market. And if the forecast for tomorrow is a small window, then it means there is only little volatility, little uncertainty in the market. And variance, so forecast error. Variance, we statisticians like the variance because the variance can be decomposed. And in this case, it can be decomposed by forecast error. Origin, variance by origin. Origin means it originates somewhere in the network and then spreads from this node, but we can decompose it by the origin, by the network node. And propagation value, that's the network importance of a node, network importance. So for example, if you consider a very remote stock market, so maybe Uganda. And so we are not looking at Uganda in this project, but suppose we were looking at Uganda. Now what happens in Uganda is probably not very important on a world scale. So if bad news coming from Uganda, so what? But if bad news coming from China, that's different. So China, we all depend in a way on China. So China has a high network importance and Uganda has a low one. We can measure the network importance on a daily basis using this methodology. So the methodology is about 10 to 15 years old. We have ourselves contributed to the methodology and we have applied it, documented in some journals. Okay, now we come to the empirical results, propagation values. Remember, this is how important is a stock market. Now, surprise somehow, surprise, maybe not. But when you look at the manufacturing economies, India, that's PSESN, and China, that's SSEC. PSESN and China, that's the blue one, and that's the green one. When you look at this, so I'm not going to show you any figures here, but that's surprisingly small, isn't it? Two huge nations, two manufacturing economies. What's their impact? It's a low one when compared to the raw material suppliers, Brazil and Russia and South Africa. That's a surprise, I believe. But remember, so we wanted to know about the impact of energy prices on these propagation values. So does an upturn in B comment make an increase in propagation values more likely? That's actually the question we are after, and our working hypothesis is yes, it does. So when suddenly the energy prices take an upturn, what happens to the distribution of propagation values between the raw material suppliers versus the manufacturing economies? That's what we are actually interested in this little project. And what we do is we compute odds ratios, odds ratios on a daily basis, and we count for each day, is the propagation value increasing for raw material suppliers, and did the energy prices take an upturn? And when you arrange these days, the number of days, in a 2x2 table and compute the odds ratio, then you see for the raw material ratio is it larger than 1 or is it smaller than 1? And if it's larger than 1, then it shows they are both going in the same direction. The yes, yes, and the no, no combinations are outweighing the heterogeneous combinations in the other diagonal. So indeed, you see this is outweighing. So if the raw material prices take an upturn, then it's very likely that the raw material suppliers are gaining importance. And for the manufacturing economies, it's just the other way around. And that's for us, that's really interesting because of two perspectives. One perspective is the BRICS. So we learned something about how the BRICS work, the inner mechanics. Somehow we see how the economy is perceiving an upturn in energy prices. That's one thing. And second, our science, statistics, is often concerned with making things visible, with making things explicit, which are there anyway. And so they are hidden in the numbers. We use statistics, sophisticated statistical methodology to make things visible. And now, if you can confirm a working hypothesis, it shows somehow that you have used the right methodology. And this is, of course, very pleasant to see that this works out in this case. So, and this again, moving window of odds ratio, and you see the black one, that's again the raw material suppliers, and the blue one, that's the manufacturing economies. And they are not really persistently below 0 or above 0 respectively. But this has been prevailing for a long time, 2012, 2014, so prevailing for a long time. But actually, this has somehow been converging then more recently. And so we are really wondering how this is going to continue, and if this divide between raw material suppliers and manufacturing economies is going to develop in the future. And that's also really a very important question, I would say, on the world scale. Why? Because remember, the BRICS covering 43% of world population and constituting a symbiotic relationship. I mean, for the world, it does matter what's happening to the BRICS with respect to this symbiotic relationship. And it does matter, especially after the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And when you break this down by country, it looks a bit messy, and you can make an effort to relate this to economic circumstances, but I'll rather not do it now. It's a bit complicated, but here is our last page, our summary. So considering a network of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, and South America tend to become more important as risk spreaders as energy prices take an upturn. So energy prices take an upturn, so being convex, so the raw material suppliers become more important as risk spreaders. Maybe you can relate this to foreign direct investment, but that's not really what we have in mind. Remember, to obtain data about foreign direct investment, you need time. So there's a time lag. The advantage of our methodology is there's no time lag. You get this on a daily basis. You can analyze what's going on right away, very precisely. You can relate this to events, for example, political trouble, but we have not made an event study for this presentation. And second conclusion is the divide between raw material suppliers and manufacturing economies among the BRICS has somewhat diminished since 2017. So they are kind of converging. But when I said we are really wondering how this is going to continue, so there's one limitation, of course. What's going to happen to the BRICS? What's going to happen with Russia? So is Russia surviving as a world player, living from exporting energy and raw material, I believe there's a question mark there. Anyway, thanks for your attention. And yeah, if you have questions, ask Angi.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Harald. Thank you, Angi, very much for your very interesting presentation. Yeah, are there any questions from the audience?
Yes, if I may.
Yes, please.
Yes, it has been some time ago that I have done time series econometrics and vector and whatever spectral analysis and so on some time ago. So I'm not aware with the latest development. I do more microeconometrics these days. But the question is, of course, I mean, it was always very heavy burden to learn from the time series development. Now, Russia, you have mentioned that is now a kind of elephant in the world economy, but not necessarily, let's say, to the positive side. It creates trouble in two ways. Whatever happens with Ukraine, I guess. One and this trouble is not in the interest neither of the West nor of China, in my view. Maybe you have a different opinion on that, but China is interested in stable developments. Now, what has Russia can Russia do? Russia can do what it has done in the past. Through media activities, create trouble on the debates going on around the globe. That's one thing, and the other is, of course, quantity activities, energy, raw material. Russia has to focus on that. That's the only active instruments it has in the future, because, let's say, human capital and technological development and so on will not be an option for the near future. So, what do we expect for the capital markets to happen out of this potential? Will there be a chance to moderate what will come from that side, or how do you see this?
Okay, I really don't know. But I mean, what can Russia do? I mean, this has at least two dimensions. What can Putin do in the short run? And I think his options are quite limited. What can Russia do in the short run, in the longer run, maybe? And these options may be less limited than Putin's options in the near future. So, but what we perceive is that Russia has kind of given up attracting investors from outside Russia. So when you look at ratings, for example, so Russian companies having a rating of A+, how is that even possible? And Russians would give you the answer when we have our own Russian rating companies and they give an A+. Okay, so I think the Russians themselves, those who know, those who don't deny reality, are quite aware of their limitations. So it's really very difficult to say. I mean, the cheapest solution would probably be Russia withdrawing from Ukraine immediately and paying the reparations. This may be the cheapest solution for Russia. But this is not going to happen. So I don't know. But I think to count on Russia is, as a raw material supplier, is the wrong strategy. So don't count on Russia, and that has a severe impact on the BRICS. So I think we are not very optimistic.
Yeah, but we may just see a substitution of the West by India and other countries of that who would be willing to take the energy and maybe also the weapons they can get from Russia if weapons are not used and not needed in Russia. There, but for other reasons.
This is certainly one huge problem, that if we sanction Russia and don't buy their raw material anymore, and so we are actually subsidizing other countries that do not impose the same amount of sanctions. That's a huge danger. And I think the European Union has more than once fallen into this trap. So that would be my message to policymakers in Europe. So don't exaggerate with sanctions or do impose sanctions, but please be aware this hurts us too. So careful about sanctions. I think this aspect has not been discussed enough in the European Union. No.
Well, the strategy could be we move out of this as fast as we can, but we can also not stop other countries to replace us. Yes, I mean that's not easy.
Yeah.
Unrealistic. At least I see that. Okay, I mean, okay, we are not solving the world problems here. I should get Andreas. You should take care.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Klaus. Yeah, I have tons of questions, but because of the time limitation, I will only ask one question. You had this difference in these propagation values, which are higher or significantly higher in raw materials economies than in the manufacturing economies. Can that have something to do that raw material is much earlier in the value chain and the manufacturing industries are more susceptible to exogenous factors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, but that's a question about the timing, yeah, the respective timing or the relative timing. Yeah, so you mean raw material suppliers come earlier, yeah, and have to come earlier because they are further up in the chain, the supply chain. That's a good idea. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, so we would have to look at the numbers. Yeah, and I would imagine a couple of several tools to do this, but that's not an easy one. But the question is very good. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, then thank you very much, both of you, for your contribution. And as far as I see, it's now my turn to make my presentation, and I will try to keep the time. So it's about common but differentiated responsibilities in a new international climate regime based on cumulated per capita emission rights. So I'm talking a little bit about the background, then the characteristics of a new international climate regime, climate protection regime, weaknesses of the current proposals, and the design of a new regime based on cumulative per capita emission rights, and then a short summary. Okay, so we have the agreements of the UNFCCC, Paris Agreement from 2015, which are reiterated in the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt in this year. So to keep or to limit global warming well below 2 centigrade by 2100, preferably 1.5 degrees centigrade. All parties should have help developing countries to slow down their emissions and take inventory of their measures every 5 years, and to support developing countries with 100 billion US dollars per year. So as you all know, that the greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere is a stockpiling problem. So you have incoming emissions from industry, from households, from the transportation sector, but the natural degradation time is much longer. Yeah, so this means that the greenhouse gases remain in the atmosphere for a long time. Some fractions, they are diminishing slower, but some fractions, they remain in the atmosphere for 1,000 years. The concentration of CO2 of 400 to 450 ppm, this parts per million, this is the kind of threshold to keep this 2% at 2 centigrade limitation. So 1.6 trillion tons of cumulated CO2 emissions represents 1.5 and 2.3 trillion 450 ppm to centigrade. But the problem is that 400 ppm has been exceeded. So the compliance with the 400 to 450 ppm means a reduction of the current greenhouse gas emissions by developed countries 80 to 95%, and developing countries by at least 60% by 2050. Yeah, so this is also mentioned by the latest IPCC report from this year, 2022, the sixth assessment report. So the problem is that the current climate protection regime does not take enough reference to the previous use of the budget by the individual states. They are always discussing what has been emitted this year, last year, and what will be emitted in the future. But what has been emitted during the last 200 years has not much been in the focus so far, or not enough at least. So the research question is, what should a new climate protection regime actually look like? Yeah. So it's mentioned in the latest IPCC report, the UNEP report, and how should the emission reduction should be divided between the countries of the world. So according to the Kyoto Protocol, only the industrialized countries have been obliged to reduce their emissions, but the new regime, based on the Paris Agreement, all countries now have to contribute. So the answer, methodologically, is that the principle of the Kyoto Protocol and their successor regimes should be according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So contents of this presentation: what is the essence and the characteristics of this principle, and how do various proposals for a new climate regime do justice to this principle, and what are the advantages of a regime based on cumulative per capita emission allowances. And so the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities is one of the principle of sustainable development and has been used in international environmental law. It's very important to find its origin in the principle of equality of rights and duties, yeah, of course, historical polluters, and the current and future efficiency principle. It has been formulated in the UNCED, the conference, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, and found its expression in the Rio Declaration, the Framework Convention, and the Kyoto Protocol of UNFCCC. So, common responsibility, yeah, it's resulting from the common heritage of mankind, yeah. So it has been used in different international laws, the law of the high seas, and the Space Act, and all these other international agreements. It means if there is shared ownership, there is shared responsibilities. Yeah, so the state's obligation to share equally, yeah, this is important, the burden of protecting common environmental resources. Differentiated responsibility addresses the material inequality in each country's framework. So there are countries who are abundant in resources, some countries who are not well off in social and economic situations. There have been various historical contributions to climate change. So if there are different framework conditions, there should be different responsibilities. And this represents a conceptual framework for a fair contribution of costs for global environmental protection. And so here are different approaches that have been internationally discussed. One is the contraction and convergence approach. That means allocation of per capita emission quotas of states that are converging over time, soft landing, reduction rates based on per capita emission income, global preference score approach, a mixture of grandfathering and per capita emission allowances. Grandfathering means that you get emission rights from what you have done, for instance, last year. Yeah? Then the Brazilian approach, this is also based on historical emissions and the ability to pay, yeah, temporal inclusion of non-annexed countries. These are non-industrialized countries on a per capita income approach, a multi-stage approach, classification according to the level of development and inclusion in a reduction regime according to defined rules. And what I am proposing is an approach based on cumulated per capita emission rights. So cumulated means that you take into account all the historical emissions, yeah, from 1750 on, where the industrial revolution started until today. And then you see how much budget does every country already have used, and for the remaining budget that is allowed to keep the 400 to 450 ppm target. And if you compare these different approaches, there are some which are quite good. For instance, this Brazilian approach, but there was no use of the adequacy principle, so to use cumulative emissions per capita. Yeah. So the proposal that I'm giving now is including all these principles of equity, polluter pays principle, and efficiency, as well as adequacy. So the weaknesses of the first 6 approaches is that they are not simultaneously. This is important. Consider that developed countries largely are responsible for the current concentration of CO2, but developing countries such as China and India are largely responsible for it's not the future. Yeah, okay. The China and India are responsible for a big part of the future CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. And these are already accumulating in the atmosphere. And to ensure a fair distribution of emission rights, as for instance in the contraction and conversions approach. And that the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere are cumulative emissions over time. This many approaches are not taking into consideration. So The new regime, based on the budget of cumulative per capita emission allowances, complies with the 2 centigrade stabilization target and allows greenhouse gas concentration to stabilize at 400 ppm. This is a 50% probability of occurrence, and 450 ppm, 75% probability of CO2 equivalents in the atmosphere. And it corresponds to the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, equality, polluter pays principle, efficiency, and adequacy. So here is the mathematical description of this approach. So you have the cumulative emissions starting from 1750 until today: oil, gas, coal, oil, gas, bunkers. This is mainly aviation, but also actually what is in bunkers for strategic oil reserves and this. Then the flaring of gas and cement industry. Yeah. I chose the population because we are talking about a per capita emission, right? I chose the year of 2007 as the denominator here, because 2007 was the end, or in 2008 there was the beginning of the new regime, and 2007 was the end of the old regime, so to say. You could easily adapt that to other times, but I have chosen this time. So other greenhouse gases, yeah, these other greenhouse gases are added, and the natural absorption of the greenhouse gas are also included, as well as sinks, for instance, through afforestation, and this has to be subtracted. So here, this is the budget, yeah, of the country. So CO2, then the other greenhouse gases, then the absorption, and here is the population. Yeah, the end of 2007 marks the beginning of the new period of the Kyoto Protocol, and the final reference year for the population must be determined politically. Yeah. What is important, you have to have a fixed year of population. Yeah. Otherwise, if you have an increasing population, yeah, this would increase the budget. Yeah. So the budget is here. If this increases, yeah, then the budget would increase. Yeah. So goal is the stabilization. You have 400 to 450 ppm, means about 2,600 to 2,400 billion tons of cumulated emissions since 1750, and the world population was about 6.5 billion. Now we have already 8. So if you calculate that, every person on Earth has a budget of emission rights of 246. This is 400 ppm, or 351. This is 450 ppm for the stabilization. So there are challenges for Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries. So Annex 1 are the industrialized countries, non-Annex 1 are the non-industrialized countries. So the Annex 1 countries have long exhausted their per capita budget. If you see here, USA approximately 1,200 tons, Germany 1,000 tons per capita. Yeah, so this is much more than this 250 to 350. Yeah. So they have to massively reduce their per capita greenhouse gas emissions, basically to the 1950 levels. That can be realized through a massive realization of negative, so-called negative emissions. That means the use of renewable energy plus simultaneous carbon storage. Yeah? So here through afforestation or carbon capture and storage. China would exhaust their budget within the next few years, 2026 for the 400 ppm, 2035 for the 450 ppm. In the business as usual scenarios, I also had other scenarios which may be earlier or later. If you have a high degree of economic development or a low economic development, then China would have more time. Countries such as India would not even reach their values by 2050. Yeah, but India is not developing so quickly, so India is not that big issue. China is the big issue because China is emitting so much CO2. So a summary, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility is one of the cornerstones of sustainable development. It's based on the different principles, and but the world has changed since the Kyoto Protocol came into force. Annex I countries are responsible for the majority of historical emissions, but non-Annex I countries, notably China, are responsible for most of the additional emissions in the future. And the new climate regime should refer to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Yeah, so I'm proposing to provide a budget of cumulative, this is important, and per capita, this is important, emission rise that includes historical emissions of the industrialized countries to ensure the compliance with the CO2 target. There are challenges for all states. For instance, China, depending on the scenario, will already exceed their budget within the next 3 years. Annex I countries have to reduce their cumulative emissions drastically, but this can be achieved through these negative emissions. So renewable energy plus carbon storage. The problem is the later the reduction is started, the more expensive it is getting for everyone. Yeah? But good news, the global abatement costs, they roughly correspond to the current German national debt per capita. So per capita, this is not so much. It's in Germany. But of course, this is per capita of every human being on Earth. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. And I'm open to questions.
Just
yeah, please, Klaus.
Just a quick thought, being not an expert in climate change topics, at least not from a from a political point of view. But it's this idea of having cumulative emission quotas, so to speak, is a nice one. The question, two things arise there out of my common sense. One is this really politically feasible? I mean, China, for instance, how can China be convinced really to join that? And the other thing is, well, noting that this is a good idea here, why is this not imposing this idea also on other issues, yes, in the world and of politics? Let's say the consequences of historical wars or slavery, the refugee debates we have in Europe, who's taking what kind of responsibility? So isn't the problem that if you start somewhere, yes, and if it's successful, we open a can of worms from thousands of things, yes, and it will be at the end we have just the cows. What do you think about that? Sorry.
Yeah. I think it's very important to include these historical emissions, because the climate change is based on cumulated emissions, so you have to take into account the historical emissions, but it also puts a lot of pressure on China, because they are about to exceed their budget, and so they also have to do much. The thing is, if we don't include China and we don't include the US, it won't work. If Germany, whether Germany fulfills their budget or fulfills their emission reduction target or not, from the global perspective, this is neglectable. Yeah?
Yes.
We have to include these two big players. Yeah, but I think this concept could be feasible, because it also takes into account this equality principle. But it's a political thing. Yeah. No, I can't hear you.
Yeah, it says a raised hand by Miss.
Yeah. Okay, Xiaojuan, you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Just to that point, which you just mentioned. I mean, China produce how many percent for the world? So the question is how Western companies can help.
Hello, I can't hear you anymore.
How can Western companies help Chinese company for the whole production process to have the standard proceed, to reduce, to get the standard of Western world to have the production, and so that to reduce the amount, and it brings nothing to give me my experience or my what I can see is it brings nothing to give the pressure to China, so that they have to reach that target without help of the Western, because China produce so many, for the Western world. It doesn't matter if this production go to Vietnam or go to India or go to Brasilia or somewhere else, and the situation happen again. I mean, China has already reached quite a high level of the production. And so that I think that's quite useful discussion. How can Western to help China to produce less?
Yes. Well, there is an already widely used mechanism. It's the clean development mechanism under the UNFCCC. This is a mechanism that, for instance, Western companies, they invest in climate change mitigation in China use their technology, and then they can use the emission reductions to swap for their own emissions. For instance, in the European emission trading system. So this concept is, I think, it's a good approach, so that there is a win-win situation for everybody. Yeah, the emissions are reduced in China, and the international companies can use the emission rights to swap for their own emission obligations.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking on my watch, I think Sascha should start his presentation now. So thank you very much for your attention. We have only 20 minutes left, so.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And once again, sorry to be late, but I had a lecture, so this is why I was joining a little bit later, and maybe you also saw me eating something, but after 6 hours of lecture, that was that was needed. I'm going to present something we did in a research project at Hasso-Plattner Institute. So I also have a research position there, and we do a big project. In general, the question is the one of the optimal location of retail stores. So that's the big thing, and one of the aspects is what I'm presenting here: concentration and co-location of retail stores in Germany. That's a thing. Why do we do it? Well, if we see the locations of retail stores and we see the theory, but there's a lot of theory of the optimal position of a retail store. But the problem is that usually these theories say that they should spread as much as possible in the area, so to be as close as possible to the consumer, and on the other hand, to be as far as possible from the competitor. So this is what the Hoof model, for example, or even if you do a logit, what they propose. But in reality, that's not what we see. So for some type of shops, we see that, for example, groceries, and this is why usually this research uses grocery stores. But for other shops, we just don't see that. For example, clothing stores, I mean, they're usually somewhere in the city center. So the question is, can we distinguish the types of retail stores according to, do they cluster, do they not cluster? So that's the basic idea. Of course, we're not the first ones dealing with this. There is other research, but what is new is we have a quite modern methodology and we have modern data. So what we use is Google Places API data. So we have point data, while usually when you see such kind of research, they use aggregated data, for example, on a 250 times 250 meter grid. And what we have is usually really point data. So that's what we do. And the idea is we downloaded the data for 3 towns because, you cannot do that for the whole country. That's a bit much. So we downloaded the data for 3 points. We classify them according to industry standard. We use that Nike system here because the European system is not very helpful with retail. Then we apply a function telling us something about the concentration. I'll talk about it in a minute and try to identify co-location patterns. This is all work in progress, so any comments are highly welcome. We're still working on it. I think the problem is easy to see. What we have here is the town area, the administrative area of Lübeck. This is a town in north of Germany. In general, I have downloaded Lübeck, Kiel, and Potsdam for a simple reason. I know those towns, and it is easier to work with new data when you know it, because you have some feeling: is it correct or is it nonsense what you get out of it? These are the supermarkets, and these are fashion stores. And here we clearly see for the supermarkets, they spread somehow in the area, but the clothing stores definitely don't. So they cluster here, which is the city center. Then we have a shopping mall here. We have some area here. So we see, okay, they don't. They don't spread in the area. The next question, of course, is, yeah, but if we compare that just from looking at the picture, to what do we compare? Do we compare to the whole area, or do we only compare to this area where people are living? And this is a basic problem of the mechanism we are talking about in a minute. There is some literature about it. I think I'm not going into details too much, but there's a little bit about new data sources, because I mean, one thing which is nice at this approach is that Google Maps data is nearly available worldwide, and all the other statistics data is usually national statistics. So if that approach works, we can do that in America, we can do that in Japan. The only country where we can't do it is China, because we know the Google situation there. But there are competitors like what is it? Here, Baidu, which I already tried, or okay, Gaude Maps. I don't know that provider, but obviously it is possible to do that in different countries. So there is a little bit of literature, but still, I mean, given the fact that this Google Maps is not really new, right? But it's not used too much in science, a little bit. Then there's a second strain of literature about the concentration, but this, okay, I have included just 2 points here, but there's a lot. I mean, because this is just, it's used especially in biology. So where we can see, can we see patterns in populations, for example? That's what they usually do there. It's quite technical. And then we have the is prominent here. This is Mrs. Oehner. She's published a lot, but still not using point data. So that's what we try to do here. What is the data? Just a quick overview of the data processing, because that is a huge part of the whole thing. So we tried the data from Google Places API. You can register there. That's quite easy. You can just download the data. To do it efficiently is a little bit of programming issue, but it works in the end. It's not that difficult. Cleaning the data is the second step, of course. Then we have one problem, and the problem is that Google does not give us this description. So if you have Google Maps in mind, there is a small description below the name of the shop, saying something like grocery store, for example. This is exactly the data they don't give you, and that is a basic problem here. So what we do is, we downloaded the data from Google Maps via web scraping. I mean, this is not exactly illegal. It's also somewhere in between, let's say, but it works. And then we have these descriptions. We map them to this Nike system. This is unfortunately a manual thing. Luckily, we have some assistants at the institute doing that part, because that's not exactly fun. And then we run the algorithms. Yeah, this is the classification system. Google gives us 591 entries, which is quite a lot, and the student, at least he gets paid for it. It makes it 35 categories. This is what we then classify in 13 for the typical German classification. We also matched that to this Nike system. This is an American system. Because the European is not really useful here. And it's 2 levels, Nike's 4 and Nike's 5 with a different number of observation of classes. Sorry. The quality of the data, this is of course difficult, right? Because I cannot go outside and count shops. So we don't know what 100% is. But what we did, we asked 3 bigger chain stores to send us a list of locations and compared this. And we found out that 89% of the data points were correct, which is not bad. I mean, this is just an error of 2%. We can live with this. What we did is we excluded very, very small shops. We excluded those which does not have any ratings, any user rating, because usually they don't exist, right? So we cleaned up the data a little bit. And some of them are wrongly tagged, but yeah. This is a map of Potsdam, so I included that so you have a feeling what the data looks like. So we have point data or coordinates of all the stores. We have the The classification system here we did, and for example, yeah, Brandenburger Straße, that one is the main shopping area. A lot of these blue dots, these are clothing stores. And so you won't see a single hardware store here, right? So that's exactly what the data is. Yeah, just an overview for the 3 data sets and the categories. We see we have a lot of clothing stores here. We have a lot of food stores. They are already aggregated. I mean, this is the more aggregated level. There's one thing we excluded because it's not enough, and this is the general dealers. It's just too few, so we excluded them in what we did with the data. For the methods, well, looking at time, there are some methods which compare the distribution of points to some basic distribution. That is exactly the problem. What is the basis? So for example, on the map before, in the beginning, we might have noticed that there are no shops here. Reason is simple, that's water. There's no shop. So, okay, you could say, yeah, well, then we exclude the water bodies. Okay, what about the forest? So, okay, nobody puts a supermarket into a forest, excluded. But what about the field? I mean, we do build supermarkets somewhere in the field. So yeah, we don't really know what to compare with. Or the red squares, this is a population we got from the statistical office in a 100-meter grid. We don't know. I mean, you can build a supermarket somewhere where nobody's living. So that is the basic problem. The algorithms take care of the so-called border correction. So if supermarket is at the border, they just assume in this area we have the same density like in this area. That's easy. But what we really want to compare with, it's a question of taste a little bit. There's no correct answer. This is why we have a lot of different algorithms. We picked the so-called KD function here. This a little bit newer function, giving us the probability. So what we see in the picture here, I skipped the equation, I think, because it's not too interesting. We see the radius and we see a probability. So if we read this chart, and we'll see some of them, let's say in a distance of 2 kilometers to a hardware store, we'll find another hardware store with a probability of 0.02%, more or less. So this is what it tells us. We shouldn't put too much emphasis on the precise numbers, because they what this term here does is just a normal standard distribution. It smooths the curve. So the probability highly depends on how broad I put these bands. But if we compare these lines here for different industries, do they not? And this is what we see. So this is a plot for Lübeck. This is a plot for Potsdam. This is a plot for Kiel. If we look at just one of them, we see that this line here, this line is clothing stores, this is electronics, this is hobby. The fact that they start here on a high level and then they are going down means the probability of finding another clothing shop is highest close to another one. So the closer you are to another clothing shop, the higher the probability you find one, which essentially means they cluster. So if you open a clothing store somewhere, you open it direct to another one. I mean, I think the reason is obvious. I go here, buy a shirt, I go to the next one, I buy jeans. And looking at time, I'm not going into too much details here. Just a few maybe hardware stores, right? So this is, what do I have? Yeah, here. Hardware stores is that green line. Here we see the exact opposite, right? A hardware store would usually locate here at, what is it? 3.5 kilometers from each other, right? So this is where you find most hardware stores. They are not clustering. Of course, some of them do. I know that in reality, but not the majority. Yeah, the differences in the pictures here, especially in this one, depends on the city structure. So Kiel, for example, has one center, and then you have a long road with a lot of shops there. So this is why we see a little bit a different pattern, but we still see the same industries high and others low. So when we just take two of them to make it a bit more visible, we have the clothing stores here. This is the red line. Here, here, and here in all three data sets. In all three sets, they are clustering. The supermarkets usually don't, right? So we can see exactly that pattern, and we can see that for all the industries. Yeah, we have some tendency to cluster clothes, hobby, furniture. Surprising for me. Furniture, I didn't think so. Health and electronics, those are the ones they usually tend to cluster. This does not necessarily mean city center. It can also mean shopping center somewhere in the suburbs. Those who do not cluster food, vehicles, and hardware stores. Those we find they don't cluster. Yeah, last thing is the co-location. Unfortunately, this is very, very much in progress. I made this table, and the table tells us how likely it is that I find a shop. Let's say, for example, I find a bookstore close to a beer store. Right? How is that? So is it if if there's a positive value, you find more. Okay, that was a bad example, I see. Yeah, a positive value means more than average. The probability is higher than the average of every shops. If it's negative, it says it's lower than the probability of other shops. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to interpret, and actually that is what I found in another paper. I tried the same, and in one of the last sentences they, yeah, unfortunately it was hard to interpret the table. So we see something here, right? We see, for example, the jewelry shops and beer, wine shops, they tend to cluster plus 0.5. Furniture and jewelry, they have what is it, miscellaneous furniture shops. So some of them make sense, but I think we'll have to work on that more. So to get more of a general relationship, we're not there right now. Yeah, okay, the conclusion, okay, that was a short presentation. Let's say one thing is the results are in line with others. This is good news. So it's not that we find something which is completely strange. It gives a little bit more information than others do, especially through the use of point data and the possibility to do that worldwide. But we still have to work on that. Yeah, so that was a little bit quick, but I try to be in time. Thank you for listening, and if you have questions or comments, always welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sascha. That was a very interesting presentation. And actually what you said about this co-location, I think you should definitely do more research on that, because this is very interesting. Yeah, I from the feeling, I often see, oh, this kind of shop, the Kick or something, is very close to a pet shop or an Aldi. Mm. Yeah, so there is definitely some kind of determinant behind that. Yeah, maybe they belong to the same so, but I think this is a very interesting topic. So yeah, are there any questions from the audience?
Certainly the type of industry the shops are in, I mean so shops are in must play a role in the whole process. Restaurants or whatever could be another thing. What is your reflecting on this? I think this is a very exciting, certainly literature you can contribute to. So I'm quite fascinated by what you are doing.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that's exactly what you mentioned. What we did not look into, but we could, is other types of points of interest, like we say technically, like restaurants, like public administration, like doctors' offices. So the data is there. The question is then a little bit where to stop. All right. I mean, a colleague of mine, for example, looked into more into public places, but then you could say, yeah, I mean, is the demand higher in a shop which is close to a kindergarten? That is a little bit difficult, right? But I think it is worth looking into it, especially especially things like restaurants and so on. I think so too. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So other questions from the audience? Maybe if you can shut your presentation, then we can see each other.
So yeah, Cynthia and
Peter Lang and Cynthia.
Yeah. Well, it was a very impressive presentation of the working fields of the FOM. I'm surprised and satisfied that it did run very well. Thank you very much. Thank you to you all. You showed that the FOM is competitive in the field of the basic research. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
and then I would like to thank to Klaus Zimmermann, because he is the father of the GLO, and therefore we have the chance to be as one of his small partners to take part in the success of the GLO. And I hope this cooperation will last very long and will help to lift up the level of FOM's research on a global base. Thank you very much. Thank you, Klaus. And that may be the rest of the year very successful, and the following decades also. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much. I got red and I have to relax for a moment. Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure working with you through not only through this session, but of course before and after. It will go well. So thank you very much for joining, and we close down the session here now, and we'll restart for those who want to go to the other job market. Should come back in half an hour. I'm sure you're not so interested in that, but it's a very important session too. So in half an hour we will be back on this channel. Okay, thank you. Bye bye. Good night. Have a good
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Everything good for you and your families, and have a good Christmas season. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.